through the Second World War, very close together, of course, they then created a situation where they had the momentum to complete the project of what they call Zionism and take that land of Israel, which they've gone on expanding ever since, of course, into the officially occupied Palestinian lands. And there's a chapter in the book called Atlantic Crossing, where I show how this Sabbatean Frankist cult, which infiltrated the Jewish community, while the great majority, while outwardly appearing to be Jewish and supporting Judaism and what they call Zionism, and they created a situation where kind of Jewishness and Zionism were the same thing. They're not. And they moved in on America, and they moved in on other countries, which is why America has such a vast network of Israel-serving organizations, which are massive, unbelievable funders of politics in America. Now, let's look at some figures here, which will kind of bring this to light. The Jewish population of the world is 0.2%. A lot of people will be shocked by that. They'll say, oh no, there has to be a lot more Jewish people than that. 0.2%. The overwhelming majority are in Israel and America. The people I'm talking about, who are not Jewish in the sense of the word, but this Sabbatean Frankist cult putting on the face of being Jewish, are a fraction of the 0.2%. In America, even though that's the second biggest concentration of Jewish people in the world, they are 2% of the population. And yet, and again, that Sabbatean Frankist cult will be a small percentage of them. Most of them will not even know there's a cult. And that from these tiny numbers, you have this enormous control of so much, not least through money. And when you follow that Atlantic crossing through, you see that this cult operating both out of Israel and within the United States was actually the central player in 9/11, and not 19 Arab hijackers who couldn't fly one-engine Cessnas.
Before we get to that then, how does the cult fit in with Sunni versus Shia?
Well, if you look at religion, and this cult, I'm talking about this aspect, Sabbatean Frankism, which came after the 1600s and has become a real major player in this web. But the web goes back further than that. And religion, again, we were talking earlier about perception. The idea is to control perception. So now they want to go and do it with the end game of technology and AI. But for a long time, and still today in vast numbers, one of their greatest forms of perception control is religion. I mean, you look at where do most Muslims come from? Muslim families. Where do most Jewish followers of Judaism come from? Jewish families. Where do most Christians come from? Christian families. Because from the moment they were born, it was basically all they ever heard, and so it became their reality. But if you also follow religions, see, it's not just controlling perception. You must keep the target population in conflict and at war with itself. Divide and rule, because while the target population is at war with itself, they are not seeing who's controlling all sides with the same hands on the strings. So you look at religion and you see the creation of a religion, and then you see the religion divided. Christianity went from Catholicism into the Protestant version and many other versions now. and you had the Sunni Shia division in Islam, and you've seen divisions in all these other religions. So you create a religion which is a belief system. And what is it? It's a postage stamp. It says, you will believe this, and if you go outside of this postage stamp bubble, then you're a blasphemer, all right? And you're not of the religion. And so it's all about perception, because they know that perception becomes behavior, behavior becomes society. And you see this everywhere you go. And there's divisions in Judaism. There's divisions in every religion. And so you play religions off against each other, but you also play factions within religions as off against each other. And we have a modern version of that now, which is called woke v non-woke. Woke, I love it. Obviously, they're not teaching grammar very well in the schools these days. I'm woke. Try being awake, mate. Much better. And what they've done with Trump, just a very quick aside, they wanted Trump in because they wanted a figure through which they could divide America. Trump is a figure, and when you read books by Marxist manipulators, they'll tell you. There's a guy called Alinsky in America, out of Chicago, who people like Clinton and Nancy Pelosi were kind of followers of. And he talks about the fact that when you basically want to divide a society, don't go for kind of grey, faceless corporations. Pick an individual, focus it all on an individual, make everything his fault, her fault. And that's what they've done with Trump. They brought him up so he can become this divisive figure. And what's happened is the Democratic Party has been driven further that way as a result of Trump. And they've created, if not physical, then certainly verbal civil war in America. This is how it's done. So dividing religions into factions is just par for the course. Dividing politics into factions is just the way they work. They want us divided so that we won't come together in unity and see what the game really is, and in the unity that it can be dealt with.
Divide and conquer, that has been used and applied for centuries, and it's still, like David's described, still strongly used today. Now, in the history of the world wars, post-World War II, we saw America was concerned about the poorer countries falling to communism, and the Russians invaded Afghanistan. The CIA are arming the Mujahideen, including bin Laden, and building a relationship with bin Laden. And there's some prime moving characters that I'd like to discuss here. My next question is the history of the Bush family and the bin Laden family, their relationship.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Father Bush and the bin Ladens were very close through a company called the Carlyle Group, which was a big operation of manipulation. In fact, according to reports, Father Bush was meeting the bin Ladens at a meeting of the Carlyle Group in Washington across 9/11. There were many coincidences like that, I can tell you. But just very quickly, one of the things I point out, because you just mentioned Russia and what have you. One of the fascinating things that you find is that the Russian Revolution was funded by Sabbatean Frankists. It was funded by the Rothschilds, and it was funded by a guy called Jacob Schiff out of America, who was a Rothschild frontman, who was connected to Leon Trotsky, etc. And what you find, and where the anti-Semitism protection racket, which is basically an expression of the cult, tries to attack me, is they say he says Jewish people were behind the Russian Revolution. Well, yeah, because they were, but they weren't Jewish. Point. This is the point. This is the whole thing that's missed. But they want people to say they were Jewish in the sense of that word, because then they can silence you and stop your meetings by calling you anti-Semitic. It's what I call the protection racket. It's not protecting Jewish people, it's protecting the cult and the Israeli government. Anyway, what you find is when you look at the official records of the Soviet Revolution immediately after 1917, of 556 leading positions, something like 400, it wasn't something like, it was 458 were Jewish. What did I say? 0.2% of the global population. But they weren't Jewish. They were Sabbatean Frankists. That's why they were operating with Rothschild money.
Why do you think Trotsky was assassinated?
Well, I don't know. There'll be many reasons that we don't know about. But the point is that this Russian Revolution was orchestrated by the cult. And what did the Russian Revolution do immediately it got power? Started, including Trotsky, who was Jewish, started targeting Jewish people. And this is another theme that makes no sense until you realize the existence of the Sabbatean Frankist cult, this inversion of Judaism that actually hates Jewish people, right? That's why it has no problem hanging them out to dry for its own ends. No problem, he hates them, right? So what you realize when you see this Sabbatean Frankist cult is why so many times when Jewish people have got to power, they've targeted apparent Jewish people. They've targeted Jewish people even more than they would anyone else. I mean, if you're a Jewish person today, I mean, including within the Labour Party, and you criticize Israel, you get attacked as an anti-Semite. You're Jewish even more vehemently than a non-Jewish person. So this is just a continuation of something that's been happening for a long time, because the people who are behind it are not Jewish in the sense of Jewish. They are Sabbatean Frankists.